Okay, awesome. We are recording. Got a few more people joining us. And then as everyone is joining, if you've just joined, if you don't mind just putting in the chat your location, what school or LEA that you're at, and then what do you do at your place of work? What is your role? All right, awesome. I feel like we have like people here from almost all over the state today, which is awesome. All right. So thank you so much for joining us today. So our session for today is supporting multilingual AAC users in the classroom. So my name is Angela Wilt, and I am one of the instructional coaches with Speaks, which is housed under the UD MTSS TA Center, and we're housed in the Center for Disability Studies at UD.
And my name is Hannah Mennella. I'm a speech language pathologist working at the Center for Disability Studies at UD. I do some instructional coaching with Angela as well as work on some assistive technology projects here. We're excited to be with you today.
We tried to make this as interactive as possible, but we definitely would love any questions or thoughts. Feel free to put them in the chat. Feel free to take yourself off mute. We love having questions and discussions when we do PD. So I'll give you a second just to read this statement. So as I said, we are from the DE MTSS TA Center. We're housed within the Center for Disability Studies at UD, and we are funded by the Delaware Department of Education. All right, Hannah, if you want to go ahead and go to the next slide. Here are our working agreements for today. I'll give you a second just to read over those. Maybe there's one that you really want to focus in on during our time together today. All right. Here are our objectives for today. So we're hoping by the end of this session, you will acknowledge the importance of AAC, consider different strategies and supports for multilingual learners who use AAC, and brainstorm what a communication-rich environment could look like for multilingual AAC users in their place of school. So thinking about AAC, we were just curious before we got started, how would you rank your knowledge around AAC? So 5 being you have all the knowledge about AAC, and 1 being that you have no knowledge. And is there anything else, anything that you'd like to learn when it comes to AAC? Anything in particular? So I'll give you a second. You can either put it in the chat or feel free to take yourself off mute. Okay, I see lots of 1s. Awesome. A 3, okay. Awesome. And then is there anything, I know somebody put in the chat that they're really interested and curious. Is there anything in particular that you'd like to learn more about AAC? All right. Has anyone ever had experience with students who use AAC for communication? Okay. So Hannah and I, in our work, we do get to work with different LEAs around the state, and I do feel, and Hannah, I'd love your thoughts as well, that AAC is growing and growing. We definitely see it a lot at our preschool levels that we work with, but it's definitely growing for sure, which is awesome. So thinking about AAC, and we're going to dive a little more into in a second what is AAC, but thinking about your current place of work, or if you work with different schools and things like that, what is the current mindset around some of these topics? Students who use different modes of communication, students who use different modes of communication and are exposed to multiple languages, and providing supports for those students. What have you been kind of seeing around about the mindset around these topics? And feel free, like I said, you can take yourself off mute or just go ahead and put it in the chat. So I know Hannah and I in our work, we find that a lot of people, they're very open-minded to it, but very scared, just because it is a new thing and a new way to communicate. Hannah, is there anything else that you've seen that I didn't share?
Yeah, I think I do think we're seeing an increase in students using AAC in the school districts, particularly high tech AAC. So I think a lot of times it's something new, something unfamiliar, something that we need more knowledge around.
Yeah, time and practice. That's definitely something as well that we see with AAC that teachers just need the time and the time to practice. Right, awesome. So these are some resources first we want to give to you. So as we said, a lot of the times Hannah and I, we see that staff members, they have a very growth mindset when it comes to AAC, learning about it and thinking about how they can implement it in their lessons so that all their students can participate. But sometimes we have teachers who have a very fixed mindset around AAC. And the idea that maybe a student who uses AAC does not belong in their classroom. And that's a mindset that Hannah and I, we have been working to shift. So we wanted to provide you some resources around shifting the mindset. We provided a resource around rightful presence, and we will definitely give you these slides. So, rightful presence is this idea that students have the right to be provided with grade level content, they have a right to an education. And then we also provided some resources around the least dangerous assumption. This is the idea that you have to give students the opportunity because, worst case scenario, they just aren't successful in that moment, but we have to at least provide them the opportunity.
And when we talk about the least dangerous assumption, often embedded in that is the idea that we need to provide students with the supports and the modalities they need to show what they can do, whether that's access to multiple languages, use of a communication device, assistive technology, that's all included in giving students that chance to show what they can do. All right. So I also like to start when I'm going to talk about AAC. I always like to frame the thinking and the conversation by starting with something like the Communication Bill of Rights, which was created by the National Joint Committee for the Communication Needs of Persons with Severe Disabilities. Bit of a mouthful, but we call it the NJC. And it's really this list of rights that was designed to kind of support individuals with disabilities in making sure that they're able to affect the conditions of their existence and their environment through communication. So this kind of is like a picture symbol representation of some of the rights on that Communication Bill of Rights. I just like to always have these in the back of my mind when I'm thinking about AAC. And we also know that in the United States, multilingual students have the right to the supports they need to equally access education, even if it's not in their home language. So kind of thinking about all these rights that our students have, how can we be advocates for them and ensure that they have these rights? So I'll give you a second to look over those. If there's any that really like kind of stick out to you or that, um, you know, that you have seen great examples of in your work, please feel free to share in the chat. I know I love when my students who use AAC are full members of the community. They're talking with all of their peers. They're moving around the school building. Everybody kind of knows them. They're a member of the community like anybody else. And another big one is to have and use their speech system all the time. I know some great para educators who are so awesome at reminding students, like, before we leave the room, oh, do we have our device? That is great too. So lots of great things there. Sorry, I can't see the chat. So Angela, do you mind keeping an eye for me in case anybody has any questions? Thank you.
Yep, you're good.
And so this is kind of like our guiding principle here. Before we dive into specific strategies and all that fun stuff, we just want to emphasize that all students have a right to an education. All students have the right to communicate. And that might look different from student to student, but they have that inalienable right. So thinking about what you do in your classroom or your district, You can just kind of mull this over as we're talking. I would love for you to think about some takeaways that could help you ensure that the multilingual students you work with who use AAC are given access to grade level content, exposure to their languages, and lots of communication opportunities. And maybe think about what barriers you see, but hopefully we'll give you some strategies to support them in doing these things. So I just always like to start out by giving a kind of brief explainer of AAC. I know some of us said we have no experience with AAC, we're interested, we're curious. That's amazing. I'm so excited to share with you because I'm very passionate about AAC. When I say AAC, that kind of is lengthened to augmentative and alternative communication. And really, it includes all of the ways someone can communicate besides speaking. So sometimes when we say AAC, we really think about like only really high-tech devices, speech generating devices, but it includes lots of other stuff too. And an AAC user might use all of these throughout their day. It can be augmentative, which means maybe we have some verbal speech, but we use an extra support to add to it, to expand on it. And it can be alternative. It can completely replace verbal speech. Maybe we're totally non-speaking and we use some sort of AAC system as that replacement. There's lots of different systems and software out there that can be totally individualized to the person. We kind of arrange them in categories from no tech to high tech. So our no tech things are things that maybe you and I use all the time. Things like gestures, our facial expressions. Some students will use vocalizations or body movements as methods of communication. But yeah, I talk with my hands all the time. I'm augmenting my verbal speech with this need to gesture all the time. We have low-tech systems, so that would be something where we need some sort of accessory, but it's not electricity, no batteries. Maybe we're doing pen and paper writing. Maybe we're using a picture communication system like a PEX book or a low-tech board with words and pictures on it. Some mid-tech options are becoming less common, but still are out there. You might see them. They are kind of usually battery powered, recordable. You can store a few messages on them, and then when you push a button or activate a part of a grid, it plays back that recording. Like I said, I'm seeing them less and less now as high tech becomes more common, but they're out there and you might see them. And then high tech maybe is what you think of when you think of AAC. So iPads or tablets with communication apps are really common, especially in the schools. And then we have some really high tech dedicated speech generating devices that are like insurance funded. They might have like really cool alternative access technology like eye tracking, head tracking, all that fun stuff. A common example that people know of when I kind of explain to them what I do is Stephen Hawking, right? Using a dedicated speech generating device that was very high tech. And then a quick mention of how our system's acquired. Typically, students will have an evaluation of some sort done by an SLP, either outside of school or in school. The devices can be paid for by the family's insurance, or they can be purchased by the LEA. And there's some differences there if you have questions about that. I think our contact info is on here somewhere. We can chat further about all the wonderful things AAC and AAC funding. But that's just a quick overview. So when I think about AAC, I think about providing my communicators access to robust communication. That's my goal. I want them to have access to all of the language they need throughout their day. No matter what system they use, whether it's, mid-tech, low-tech, high-tech, no-tech, or most commonly a mix of kind of all of them, we wanted to support them in accessing the robust communication and language they need to be able to say exactly what they want to say in the language that's appropriate for the context. So, right, if family speaks Spanish at home, we want them to be able to create messages in Spanish to family. But if teacher only speaks English at school, they need to be able to communicate in English at school. We want them to be able to combine words into longer utterances, even if that's not something they're doing right now. We want them to have that capability to learn and grow and start to expand their language, just like typical language development. And then also to eventually learn literacy. Again, maybe we're not tackling that right now. Maybe we're new to AAC. Maybe we're still working on some basic language, but eventually we should have access to literacy. Even if it's something like we don't use the keyboard at all when we first get the device, but it's there as an option when we're ready. We want that system to have a lot of vocabulary on there, if possible. Vocab from a lot of different word categories for a lot of functions, right? So we should be able to obviously request, but also respond, comment, do like social communication, whether that's manners or teasing, joking, laughing with friends, asking questions, requesting information. There's so many things that we use communication for throughout the day, and we want our AAC users to be able to do that as well. And they might need some support and some teaching to get there, but we want them to have that access. And to provide them that access, we give them a lot of vocabulary options on the device. So we have our core vocab, which is our kind of small set of words that we use probably 80% of the time. It's super flexible. We can combine it in different ways to make different sentences. It's usually our verbs, our really general adjectives like good, bad, very, things like that. Some general nouns, pronouns, articles, and conjunctions. So you can see I have a little grid here with 36 commonly used core words. And you can see how that is really some of the first words that our kiddos learn, whether they're speaking or non-speaking, because they're really flexible and we can use them for a lot of things, right? If we can say, I want that, you know, we can do a lot with that. That's powerful. And then we have our fringe vocab, which is more specific words that describe particular things. It's often specific nouns and adjectives. This includes all of our school words, our academic vocabulary that's specific to a subject or topic, as well as our individual words. So things that are relevant to that individual person, our pets' names, our friends' names, our coffee order at Starbucks. We also want them to have, like I said, access to the alphabet. Even if they're not using it right now, it's still there for their exploration and for their eventual literacy. And we want them to have access to as much of this as possible in all of the languages that they speak. So here's just a visual to show that vocabulary breakdown that I talked about. A student's vocabulary will consist of, like I said, the core vocab, and then our fringe vocab, which is broken down into specialized and individualized. Just a little visual representation, because I know there's a lot of words there. So just a little note about this. Even a really robust AAC system might not have every word a student needs in all languages, especially as we get into those like high-level academic conversations. Maybe we're in science class, we're talking about the life cycle of a butterfly. Is our AAC device going to have the word chrysalis and pupa and all that fun stuff? Probably not. But there are things we can do to get around that and still provide students with the access they need. One thing is to work with the SLP to add new vocabulary when it's needed and appropriate, but we don't want to add a bunch of random words that we're going to only use once and kind of clog up the system there. So we might use something like descriptive teaching strategies. I have a link here if you'd like to dive more into this. But that means using core words to explain academic terms and concepts. It supports our students in understanding the topic and being able to explain them to us in the language that they have on their device, rather than just like memorizing and labeling a word. So maybe instead of the word metamorphosis, maybe that's not on my device, but maybe I can say, caterpillar, go in house, change, come out butterfly. Do I understand metamorphosis? Yeah, definitely, right? So that's a little bit about descriptive teaching, and you can kind of see here. So our student, if they can label an elephant, that's great, but can they also describe it in a way that they understand that shows they have a deep knowledge of that word, that vocabulary? And again, making sure they have access to spelling. I work with some middle schoolers now who in their curriculum, they do an amazing job of using their vocabulary that's on their device, but then also they have a keyboard on their home screen. So when it's a word that's not stored in the device, they can type it out for their teacher to respond. Being a good communication partner, this kind of applies to our AAC users, to our multilingual kiddos, and honestly, just our students in general, right? We want to presume competence. We want to presume that they can learn, they are understanding us, that they're doing their very best. Especially with students who are multilingual and with AAC users, and doubly so with multilingual AAC users, we want to give lots of wait time for processing. It sometimes feels like forever, but patience is so important. It helps give them the opportunity to be independent in communicating, but it also kind of is a relationship builder, right? If you're always giving wait time, they know they're not going to interrupt me. This is a communication partner I can trust. We want to get to know them, get to know their interests, their culture, what they want to talk about, just to have them be more engaged with you. We want to make sure they have consistent access to their AAC device. We also want to accept and acknowledge all forms of communication. So We might use a high-tech device sometimes we might use a gesture. We can accept and acknowledge it all. If there's something that maybe they use a gesture for, but we know we could model the language for it on their device, then great, let's do that. But let's acknowledge what they're saying and show that we're listening to them. And then always being a good model. If it's an AAC user, we want to show them how to use the AAC by using it to communicate with them. Just like we model any skill that we want a student to learn. And this is something coming back to that like time and practice. I think this can sometimes be a barrier for teachers is they don't have the time to or the access to a system to practice using it. So then they don't feel comfortable modeling for a student. So having them have a little bit of extra time with the device, a little bit of extra training can be really powerful in that it lets them be a model for that student to then absorb and see. As we think about how our typical students learn language when they're babies, they're just like soaking up like a sponge all the language around them. We want to provide that input from an AAC user communicating on their device that they can soak up like a sponge and then come back and build those skills. Okay, I have a quick, cute little video of a multilingual AAC user just so you can kind of see what this looks like.
Here, look. Is she here? Say shh. Shh. Listen. Shh. Escucha. Oh, it's Juliet. Hi, Juliet. Hello, Juliet.
Say, how are you, Emily?
How are you? How are you?
Good?
Juliet's good. And how are you?
Good.
Yeah, she's good.
Copy me.
She wants you to copy her. They're doing the same as, oh, and Juliet, they're all doing it. Look.
A, B, C, D. Se van a casar, serán un vecino. Cópiame. Por favor. Bien. Tú.
¿No? Está bailando con la rodilla.
Okay, so any thoughts or observations about that video that we just watched? Anything that you noticed? I know there are some things we kind of saw she was speaking English on FaceTime with whoever. And then Spanish at school. I love that you can kind of hear her device has both accents. So it sounds when she's speaking Spanish like it's speaking Spanish, which is great. We'll talk about that a little bit more. But I also think just a cute little video. She's a cute kiddo and seems to be very involved, right? She's like social, has got friends at school that she's jump roping with and asking to copy her. Oops. Okay. So now I just want to quickly run through some common AAC and multilingualism myths and the kind of what's the fact there. So we often might hear that children who use AAC are not able to become proficient multilingual communicators, maybe because they're non-speaking, maybe because they have a disability and we're worried about the cognitive load. And the fact is, it's not true. With the correct supports and robust access, children who use AAC can be multilingual. It is not an increased cognitive load. We know that young kids especially have the cognitive flexibility to pick up on two languages. And if it's modeled and they're supported, they absolutely can do that. Like that little one there, right? Clearly a multilingual communicator, even though she had a disability and was non-speaking. Some people believe it's better to only focus on one language with AAC users, especially if we have communication disorders or delays. And the fact is, multilingualism has been shown to benefit children's development, and it can be harmful to a student to kind of deprive them of the languages used by those around them, right? So if family speaks Spanish, if we're not teaching them Spanish or allowing them access to Spanish, then they're missing out on relationships with family and cultural things and community, and that can be harmful. And then the last one, AAC users with disabilities cannot code switch between languages. That's common. Like we hear maybe, oh, at school they have to speak English because school speaks English and at home they only speak Spanish because home speaks Spanish. And that's just not true. A lot of high-tech AAC systems have options for representing multiple languages. Some of them, it's super easy. It's like a one-button click and we're in between. And we can teach users how to navigate that and teach them the skills, the strategic skills that come along with choosing what language to use when. So here are the guiding principles I'm going to talk to you about today for supporting multilingual AAC users in your school. We're going to talk about acknowledging and utilizing all languages, creating strong family partnerships, which support that buy-in, that carryover, that skill development, and generalization across settings. And it also, again, kind of supports them in developing strong relationships with their family and their community. We don't want them to only be able to communicate at school. We want to allow for code switching because that enables them to use AAC across settings, across contexts, across communication partners. And we want to make sure that we're practicing cultural awareness in our work. And we'll dive a little bit deeper into these. So creating family partnerships. We want to get to know the family, and we know that's best practice when we work with multilingual learners anywhere, but especially with our AAC users who are multilingual. The family might have different views about disability, different priorities for language and learning goals. And so we want to get to know that and kind of understand their perspective. We also want to have a good relationship with them so that we can provide them education. Having a child with an AAC device is often a new experience for families, and they probably will need your support in learning how to navigate that and how to support their communicator at home. So we want to give them lots of information, lots of education, and we want to have a good relationship with them so they feel like we're coming from a good place with that. So there's some great resources. I have some linked here, but there's some linked also at the end of the slideshow. You can send out, there's a lot of resources in English and in Spanish and some in other languages as well that you can give to families to fill out to get to know their priorities, what they believe the child wants to talk about. So here I have linked a Spanish vocabulary customization questionnaire where you can give this to parents and have them fill out what are the words they want their student to have on the AAC device? What do they want that to look like? Get them to be a partner in creating and editing that vocabulary so that they're bought in. When we are providing education about AAC systems, we want to try to do it to the family in the language they're most comfortable if possible. A great resource for this is to contact the device vendor and see. A lot of device vendors provide, when insurance or a school district purchases a device, it comes with like support. And that support maybe includes someone who could set up, maybe it might be virtual, but a meeting with that family and with you in their home language to help them learn the basics of using the device. And that can be helpful also to have like that second perspective, that second voice kind of chiming in. And then we also want to show the family that we value their culture and their input by including meaningful heritage vocabulary and culturally appropriate representations of that vocabulary in the device. So if they speak a different dialect, we want to make sure the words are correct. If they have certain cultural foods or holidays or celebrations or things like that, we want to represent that. Same thing like family member names. If they call family members one thing, we want to make sure that's accurately represented, right? This is a student's voice. So AAC code switching. When we're considering AAC for a multilingual student, code switching is something we should definitely think about. It's important for our multilingual students to be able to switch efficiently between languages. We know that's a big component of multilingualism. Some devices have really great pre-made multilingual vocabularies. Like I said, you can just like tap a button and switch between your languages. It'll be pretty similar layout, symbols, things like that. So it's familiar to the student between languages. There are some devices where you can do a little bit of programming to create that multilingual like switch back and forth. But when you're looking at device options, particularly during evaluation and trial, think about what the student needs and if that is an option that's available. Do they need to be able to switch between languages in the middle of a sentence? Is that something they will be able to do independently if it's one button? Is that something they'll be able to do independently if they need to like exit out of their vocab and choose another one? That might be a little harder for some students. And then I always like to make sure when I'm looking for a true multilingual device system that it changes voice when the vocabulary changes. So if I switch to my Spanish vocabulary, I want it to sound like I'm speaking Spanish. If I'm speaking French, I want it to sound like I'm speaking French, not like I'm speaking French with an American accent, because it sounds funky, right? We already have a computer synthesized voice. We don't want it to be even funkier than that. And we might need to model for especially young students or students who are new to AAC, how they can switch between languages to help them become independent in it. Again, that's something you can talk with your SLP about, talk with your device vendor company about. There's lots of great video tutorials online for different systems. I highly recommend like visiting the YouTube channel or the website of the device system if you're looking for more tutorials. But we can talk with students about those kind of metalinguistic skills, about when we use each language, who understands what language, and when we need to switch back and forth. And we might also, that is also a great thing to kind of educate the family on when we're doing that family device education. Show them how can they help the student switch between languages if the student's not independent in that yet. So I have a little example here, just a short one, of an app called TD Snap that has what they call true code switching, and you'll kind of see the example. But there's also some other apps that have similar features or can approximate this kind of code switching. It's different for every app, but it's definitely something to consider.
Go over to English. Again, there's Ella. Let's see.
So Ella is the name of the English voice on the device, and the Spanish speaking voice is called Valeria. So she'll use those terms to refer to the voices of the device.
The like, over to Spanish.
Galletas de animales.
Again, you will hear Ella and then you will hear Valeria.
I like. Galletas de animales.
Okay, so that's true code switching.
Okay, so what did we kind of notice about that? What were your observations there?
Hannah, one thing I noticed, it was really easy to navigate between the two languages on the system.
Yep, so that's one of the ones where there's just one button that's always going to be your language toggle.
So yeah, I saw in the chat someone said or asked, is it switching? So yeah, so like Hannah was just saying, you can kind of toggle back and forth between the two languages.
Yep. So she starts out, I believe, in English, and then you can kind of see it looks very similar, right? The Spanish and the English pages look really similar. And we can watch it one more time if we want to like see the switch.
And that was TD Snap, right, Hannah?
Yep, that was TD Snap. This video, the whole video is here. I just played a short clip, shows touch chats, code switching, Proloquoticos, code switching, and lamp words for life code switching, as well as TD Snap, and talks a little bit about what it looks like in each one. So if you have a student who uses one of these and you want to look and see what it might look like, it's a great video resource.
Hannah, really quick before you play the video, Maria asked in the chat, can you talk more about when/how modeling for code switching might be appropriate?
Yeah, so I think that sometimes, and even with our students who are not AAC users, who are multilingual, sometimes there's like in the beginning, when they're like developing language, they just kind of speak in whatever language comes to their mind first without necessarily considering their audience. And then that's a skill that they learn over time, right? That's a socially learned skill of like, okay, you know, grandma speaks only Spanish and doesn't understand when I speak English. Mom speaks both. My teacher only speaks English and doesn't understand Spanish. And so that's something we can talk with students about. Like, for example, if we're talking to friends and a student is talking in Spanish, great. We can say, oh, yep, your friend here also speaks Spanish. They can understand what you're saying. But then if we go to talk to, say, a paraeducator who only speaks English and Spanish, we can say like, oh, you know, she doesn't understand. We can switch our device into English to help her understand what we're saying. And sometimes with students, our multilingual students who have language disorders, having exposure to the auditory output in both languages and the same visual representation is a great learning tool. So to be able to say like, oh, you said, I forget what they said, animal crackers in Spanish, like to say, oh, that was your word animal crackers. In Spanish, it sounds like galetas de animales, and like compare both of them and say like, oh, it's the same word, right? We see our animal crackers and build that language representation. But when I talk about teaching code switching, I'm talking more about like the social skill of when we use which language with who. Great, yeah. And I'll play the video one more time, just because I like to, I'll kind of point it out a little bit. It's quick. She goes quick.
Go over to English.
So here she is in English, and you can look and see the text underneath of the buttons is in English here. What Angela is talking about, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but up here in the top left corner is this little button that says Spanish. That's the language toggle. So she's on her English page now. Words are in English.
English.
I
Again, there's Ella. Let's see. I
like.
Go over to
Okay, so now she hit that toggle and now she's switched into Spanish, and you can see the button now says Inglés, which now means we're in Spanish. You can hit that button to switch back to English, and you can see the words under the buttons are now in Spanish, but the symbols are the same. The representation is the same. That is a teaching tool to help the student know whether the word is in English or in Spanish, it's the same meaning, right? So symbols are the same, color coding is the same, organization is the same. And also you'll hear when she activates her button, the voice has changed. So she was speaking with Ella's voice, and now she'll be speaking with Valeria's voice.
Spanish.
Animales.
Again, you will hear Ella, and then you will hear Valeria.
I like. Galletas de animales.
Okay, so
you hear the voice change in the middle of that sentence there. You can also see that your function buttons are in Spanish on this page. So your speak button up here is in Spanish, your clear button, your like all of your little keyboard button, all of those are also in Spanish. And this page set is a built-in multilingual Spanish-English page set that is like comes with this app. You don't have to program it to be like this. But every app is different. Again, if you have students that you know, like, oh, a lot of my students use Perloquoto Go, I'd like to see what that looks like, you can check out this video and see that as well.
Go over to
It's just a little long for us to watch all at once. All right, so thinking about cultural awareness and AAC, we know that the AAC system is that student's voice. We want it to represent who they are and what they want to say, right? So we want it to be representative of their culture. We want it to be accurate and respectful. But we also want to consider student preference as well. So talk with the student, with the family, with the SLP about what customization is possible and what customization is desired. Like you just saw, we can change the voice to reflect an accent. We can change the voice's gender, the pitch, the speed, as well as just like the general style. So there'll be a couple options for Spanish voices, a couple options for English voices, a couple options for French, blah, blah, blah. So you can pick like which one the student likes best. I have one particular friend who is a middle schooler who loves his voice to be at the lowest, deepest pitch possible. That's his preference. He likes it like that. One time I came in and I said, what happened to your voice? And he said, I like it. He had changed it to be that way. That was his preference. As long as I can understand what he's saying, people can understand what he's saying, great. We can also, in most AAC systems that are available, change the skin tone of symbols. Not all of them, but a lot of them do offer this option. And again, that might be something we talk with a student and the family about. What do we want the people on your talker to look like? And they can pick between the shade ranges. If they want it to look like them, maybe they don't, maybe, you know, it's like the emojis, right? We can change the skin tone. For some vocabulary that's super unique to a student's particular family or culture, we might need to create our own symbols. So a lot of AAC systems have the option to import real photos or, you know, cartoon symbols you download off the internet or things like that. So if that vocabulary doesn't exist in the system or it's inaccurate to the student's experience, like, you know, there's a food they eat all the time, but the device built-in picture of it doesn't look like what it looks like when that student eats it, maybe we put a photo of what it looks like. Again, it's about student and family preference, but I just want you all to know that these customization options are out there in the AAC world, so it's something to consider when you're programming. And then a last kind of mention, we know that languages all have different dialects, and those dialects may affect what words we use for certain reference and what those words sound like. You can go in and edit. So if there's like a word, I forget what I was talking about, somebody, maybe like the very hungry caterpillar I was talking about, somebody said, I can't remember what it was now, so this isn't going to be a good example. There's a word that is directly translated from English that they like don't really use in some dialects of Spanish, so they use a different word. Or, you know, maybe it's a food item that some dialects would call one thing and other dialects might call another. We can go in and edit it to reflect what that student's family.
One thing I'm thinking of, Hannah, is like pop versus soda.
Yeah. Yep. Any like dialectal differences. And that's something, again, this is going to be a great way to get the family involved, hopefully feeling valued and understanding that this is the student's voice, right? We want this to be how their family talks because that's how they talk. And then most systems also have an alternate pronunciation feature. This is really helpful for names. A computer synthesized voice loves to say a name like kind of crazy. So we can type in this alternate pronunciation settings, like a phonetic spelling of the name, and get it to sound like what it really sounds like. Because, you know, you want to be pronouncing your family members and friends' names correctly. And if you have a wacky computer synthesized voice that says something crazy, it's going to be maybe socially difficult. So these are all customizations that you can do. Again, I'm happy to like answer questions about these if you have any. But AAC, infinitely customizable, designed to be individualized to a student. And this also applies, I'm talking a lot about high-tech AAC here, but this also definitely applies to things like low-tech AAC. If we're having like a paper core board for a student, can we have the vocabulary that's culturally appropriate? Can we have, you know, if we're talking about holidays, making sure their holidays and their celebrations and their traditions are represented? Do the symbols look like people they're familiar with? It really applies across all AAC systems. So creating a communication-rich classroom, I have a link here to some great resources for educating non-AAC users about AAC. I find that sometimes with students, they are curious about why certain students might talk using a device or using a different system. So this link has a lot of great books, videos, TV shows, movies that you can explore to maybe talk to classmates about AAC and what that would look like. But in general, we want to educate our students about being accepting of all of their classmates, right? Whether they speak multiple languages, whether they use a device to communicate, whether they use their body to communicate. We can talk a little bit to them about how all that communication is valid. And it might be different, but it still works. So I think especially now where we work a lot in a preschool that has a lot of AAC users and a lot of typical peers. And the typical peers have had this conversation with their teachers, but are really wonderful about like modeling on the devices, understanding, you know, saying like, oh, you need to wait. He's like looking for a word or something. Like they've become such great advocates for their friends. And it carries with them as they grow up to be more accepting adults. And then some other great options for classrooms that are communication rich is to bring in AAC as like a tier 1 support for all students. Obviously not high tech, expensive devices, but I love when a classroom has a core board available for students. You can download them off the internet to print out and laminate. A lot of the device companies will give you free poster sized ones if you ask. I have Lamp Words for Life here in Greek that I downloaded. I have Touch Chat in Spanish, and I have TD Snap in, I want to say, maybe Mandarin. So there's lots of low-tech downloadable options out there. If you're interested, again, I can send you lots of links, but if you just Google like the name of the vocabulary system your student is using and like low-tech manual board, you can find all of these and print them out. And it's a great way to expose all students to different communication modalities, but it also provides that multimodality opportunity for communication. We know always with our multilingual learners that visual supports are great. And I love when vocabulary, especially new vocabulary, topic vocabulary for academics, is presented in multiple languages and visually as well. So students can, again, make that connection between the word in one language, the word in another language, and like the referent.
And the one thing I was gonna say, the one thing to consider if you are to do that is just trying to make sure that the images are consistent.
Is there anything else that you have found helpful in your classrooms or that you've seen done that has been helpful for creating a communication-rich classroom for multilingual learners, whether they use AAC or not?
One thing Hannah and I have seen is it was only in English, but we've seen the Fly Eagles Fly song. We had a teacher put that together using symbols, which was really cool.
Yeah. But I like to say, we're kind of wrapping up a little early here, but I like to say AAC is just language, right? It's just communication. Sometimes we separate it as its like own thing, scary thing. It's just language, right? So language supports that support your students are going to support your AAC users. If whatever language supports you provide for multilingual learners are in some way going to support an AAC user. You might need to provide them in a different modality, but it's just language. So it's not so scary. It's just language in a different way. So I have linked all of our resources here. San Francisco State University has a great resource library and some Padlets and things like that. There's some blog posts. Here's some places where you can download and print out resources in Spanish and English for families. And I think that is it.
So yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and drop the link to the survey in the chat. We would definitely appreciate if you do take it. We do take our feedback to DOE. So we would really appreciate if you could just take a quick moment just to take our survey. If you have any other questions, Hannah and I will hang on for a few minutes. I'm gonna go ahead and stop the recording. Oh, Hannah, can you just go to the next slide really quick? We were told to go ahead and share this. This is the Padlet for the multilingual learner Padlet from DOE. And then I guess tomorrow there's a special guest speaker. So just here's some information on that. Hannah and I are going to hang on.